Before Reverend Silas Harrow lost his pulpit, before Sheriff Rusk surrendered his keys, and before 12 forgotten children were named aloud inside Mercy Crossing Church, there was only a blind dog scratching at the floor. His name was Candle. He was too old to frighten anyone. His eyes had gone white years before. His muzzle was silver, his left ear torn, and his back legs trembled whenever the morning bell rang through the boards. Children laughed when he bumped into pews. Deacons complained that he smelled of rain and ashes. Reverend Harrow once called him a poor creature clinging to what was already gone. Eliza Wren clung to him anyway. She was 19, orphaned, and living on laundry work behind the church when the poor box disappeared. $37.40. Enough money to make the town angry, not enough to explain why Reverend Harrow wanted the matter settled before sunset. The preacher did not shout. He never had to. He only stood before the congregation, folded his hands, and said temptation often found the loneliest hearts first. By noon, Eliza was a thief in every mouth. But Harrow's eyes did not stay on the missing money. They kept drifting toward the third pew on the left. Then Candle moved. He limped down the aisle, past Sheriff Rusk's boots, past the women whispering behind gloved hands, and stopped beneath that same pew. His nose pressed to one black seam between two planks. Sheriff Rusk's hand paused near his belt. Candle scratched once, twice, then harder, until blood spotted one nail and the whole church went silent. The plank gave way. Under the church floor, wrapped in oilcloth, waited a rusted tin box. Inside were folded birth records, and the one on top had a clean square cut from the place where Eliza Wren's name should have been. For a breath after the tin box appeared, the church held its silence like water in a sealed jar. Eliza did not reach for it. She knew better than to touch anything with every eye in Mercy Crossing aimed at her hands. Sheriff Rusk crouched first and pulled the box from the hollow. Dust clung to the oilcloth. The papers inside smelled of damp wood and lamp smoke. Reverend Harrow stepped down from the pulpit with the calm of a man walking toward a sickbed. "Careful, Sheriff," he said. "Old papers can make new wounds." That was how Harrow spoke. Soft enough to sound kind. Heavy enough to make a person feel accused before the accusation arrived. Eliza stood beside Candle with her fingers curled into her skirt. She had been raised on other people's leftovers and warnings. Do not speak too loud. Do not ask who your father was. Do not say your mother's name inside the church unless someone else says it first. Mercy Crossing had kept her alive, but never let her forget the cost. She lived in a laundry room behind the chapel. For 6 years she had scrubbed collars, boiled sheets, polished pews, and carried ash buckets before sunrise. The church paid her in coins when the committee remembered, in bread when they did not. 3 days earlier, Deacon Waller had told her the room would be needed for visiting mission workers by the end of the week. Harrow had placed a folded notice beside her wash bucket. She owed $4.20 for flour, lamp oil, and firewood advanced in Christian Trust. Eliza had stared at the number until it blurred. Candle had rested his chin on her boot. The dog had come to her after Miriam Wren died, though most folks said a blind dog was a burden a poor girl could not afford. He followed Eliza by the sound of her steps and the smell of lye soap in her sleeves. Some mornings she had to lift his hindquarters over the church threshold. Some nights he whined in his sleep. He had one strange habit Eliza never understood. Whenever the chapel bell rang, Candle turned his head toward the old pews, as if listening for someone beneath the boards. Now the whole town was watching that habit become evidence. Sheriff Rusk drew one folded record from the box, frowned at the cut square where a name should have been, and slid it back before anyone else could read it. "This belongs in my office." "It belongs to whoever buried it," Eliza said. Her voice came out thin. Still, it carried. A murmur moved through the congregation. Gideon Shaw, the banker, stared at the box with a discomfort that did not fit a missing poor box. Mrs. Ruth Bell, old and bent near the aisle, pressed a hand against her mouth when she saw blue thread on one scrap of cloth. Harrow noticed her before Eliza did. "Ruth," he said gently, "you look faint." The old woman lowered her eyes. Sheriff Rusk closed the tin lid. "Until I know what this is, nobody talks about it outside this room." but the town had never needed permission to talk. By late afternoon, Eliza's name had passed through the general store, the feed yard, and Shaw's bank. Some said she had hidden stolen money under the floor. Some said Miriam Wren had been trouble before her. One man near the blacksmith shop said the blind dog ought to be put down. Eliza heard all of it while carrying her wash bundle behind the church. Candle walked slowly at her side, one shoulder brushing her skirt. Every few yards he stopped and lifted his nose toward the chapel. At sunset, Reverend Harrow found Eliza by the rain barrel. He held her folded notice in one hand and the poor box key in the other. "The sheriff will ask questions tomorrow," he said. "I advised him to be merciful if you are honest tonight. I did not take that money." His expression saddened. "Child, sometimes shame speaks before truth is ready." Eliza looked past him to the dark church windows. One pane reflected Candle's pale eyes like two dead moons. Why was my name cut out of that paper? For the first time that day, Harrow's kindness paused. Only a moment. "Names are not always gifts," he said. "Some are burdens the dead leave behind," Candle growled. It was a low sound, broken by age, but Harrow stepped back from it. He covered the motion by turning toward the door. "Keep the animal away from the chapel tonight," he said. After he left, Eliza tried to lead Candle to the laundry room. The dog refused. His legs trembled. His breath came rough. Still, he pulled against the rope, nose fixed on the vestry window. Eliza whispered his name twice. Candle did not move toward her. Instead, the blind dog lowered his head, found a gap beneath the locked side door, and began to scratch at the threshold, as if something inside was calling him back. Eliza waited until the last light left the church windows. Mercy Crossing settled slowly after dark. Wagon wheels stopped, the blacksmith's hammer went quiet, and lamps bloomed behind curtains until the town looked peaceful enough to forgive itself. Behind the chapel, the laundry room smelled of wet linen, cold ash, and the soap Eliza could never quite wash from her hands. Candle would not lie down. He stood by the door with his head low, breathing hard through his nose. Twice, Eliza tried to guide him back to the blanket near the stove. Twice, he turned toward the vestry wall. His paws shook, but his stubbornness held. "You already showed them," she whispered. They saw the box. Candle gave a thin whine. Not fear, but the sound he made when he was searching for something he had lost. A little before midnight, Eliza wrapped her shawl tight and took the old laundry key from the nail above the washtub. It would not open the vestry, only the side passage where she carried linens on Sundays. Part of her hoped Sheriff Rusk had barred that passage. If the lock refused her, she could tell herself she had tried. The lane behind the church was muddy from a thin evening rain. Candle moved slowly beside her, one shoulder brushing her skirt. Near the rain barrel, he stopped and sneezed at the ground. Eliza crouched. A fresh boot print cut through the wet soil. Not hers, not the sheriff's broad heel. Narrow, polished, city leather. Reverend Harrow owned boots like that. The laundry key turned with a soft scrape. Inside, the church smelled different at night. Less like hymns and beeswax. More like damp wool, old pine, and secrets pressed flat under years of prayer. Candle entered first, nails clicking once before he froze. His nose lifted toward the vestry. The door was locked, but fresh metal marks scarred the wood above the latch, as if someone had missed the keyhole in haste. Eliza pressed her ear to the panel. A faint sound came from inside. Paper shifting. She backed away, pulling Candle toward the choir robe curtain just as the latch clicked. Reverend Harrow stepped into the passage with a lamp in one hand and a leather document satchel in the other. His collar was unbuttoned. Without the congregation watching, his face looked older and less kind. He paused, listening. Candle's breath rasped, and Eliza held one hand gently over the dog's muzzle. Harrow's eyes passed across the curtain. The bell rope tapped against the wall in the wind, drawing him away. At the chapel doors, he stopped and glanced toward the pews. "Poor Miriam," he said to the empty room. "You never did know when to let a thing stay buried." The name struck Eliza cold. Her mother's name did not belong in Harrow's mouth at midnight. After the front door closed, Eliza waited until her knees ached, then slipped into the vestry. Harrow had left the room too clean. The desk held no loose papers. The shelf where baptism records usually leaned stood bare. The cabinet below the window had been wiped with a damp cloth, leaving dark streaks in the dust. Sheriff Rusk had taken the tin box, but someone had searched the room after him. Candle went straight to the corner behind the old communion table. He pressed his nose to the baseboard and pawed once, gently, as if even that small motion hurt. Eliza used the butter knife from her apron to pry the board loose. A folded scrap slid out, no bigger than her palm. It was brittle at the crease and dark along one edge, where lamp oil had soaked into it. She held it near the covered lamp and read the printed line at the top. County Birth Register, Mercy Crossing Parish copy. Most of the writing had been torn away. One corner remained. Female child, born the 3rd of October, 1868. Mother, Miriam W. The rest was gone. Eliza sat back on her heels. She knew her age because Harrow had told her. She knew her mother's death because town women had repeated it often enough to make it sound like scripture. But she had never held proof that Miriam Wren had stood somewhere alive while someone wrote Eliza into the world. Candle nudged her wrist, then turned his nose back to the open wall. Behind the baseboard, Eliza found a smear of blue wax on the inner wood. Church candles were white. Funeral candles were white. Blue wax came from the small lamp Miriam had kept in the laundry room, a memory Eliza owned only in pieces. Blue glass, trembling light, hands red from soap. The memory opened and vanished before she could hold it. A floorboard creaked outside. Eliza covered the lamp. This time, the boots were heavier. Sheriff Rusk entered through the side passage with a lantern and a shotgun crooked in one arm. His face was grim, but not surprised enough. "I told Harrow this was a mistake," he muttered. Eliza stayed behind the communion table with one arm around Candle. Rusk crossed to the vestry cabinet, opened it, and swore under his breath. Then he saw the loose baseboard. "Eliza," he said, as if he had expected her and feared finding her anyway. She stood, because hiding would only make her look guilty. Candle struggled up beside her, almost slipping on the floor. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you're making," Rusk said. Eliza folded the scrap in her fist. "I am trying to know why my mother's name was under this church." His eyes moved to her hand. "Give me that, so it can disappear too?" Something tired passed across his face. "There are men in this town who can turn one torn paper into a burglary charge before breakfast. Reverend Harrow?" Rusk looked toward the door before answering. "Go back to your room. Pack what you can carry. If you're smart, you'll be gone before the morning bell." Candle growled, low and broken by age. Rusk raised the lantern toward him. "That dog is half dead. He found this." "No," Rusk said, his voice dropping. "Miriam found it first." The words changed the room. Eliza forgot the shotgun, the cold, and the torn paper cutting into her palm. "What did you say?" Rusk seemed to regret breathing. He reached into his coat and placed a small brass tag on the communion table, blackened by age, stamped with a number and 2 letters, 17M.W. "I found it in the tin box before Harrow saw," he said. "I should have told the county years ago." Outside, a wagon slowed in front of the church. A lantern stopped beyond the window. Rusk closed his hand around the shotgun. "Too late now," he whispered. The lantern outside the church window did not move for several seconds. Its light hung in the rain-dark glass like an eye that had not yet decided what it had seen. Sheriff Rusk lowered his voice. Behind the choir curtain, now, Eliza did not trust him, but the wagon wheels had stopped at the front steps, and Candle's body had gone stiff beside her. She slipped behind the curtain with the dog and pressed the torn birth scrap against her chest. Rusk lifted the lantern, crossed the vestry, and shut the loose baseboard with his boot just as the church door opened. Reverend Harrow came in first. Behind him stood Gideon Shaw, the banker, buttoned in a dark coat too fine for mud and midnight. Deacon Waller held the wagon lamp near his chest. All 3 men looked toward the vestry as if they had expected to find someone there. "Sheriff," Harrow said, almost warmly, "you received my message." "I received enough of it," Rusk answered. Shaw's eyes went to the cabinet. Were the parish copies removed? The question was too quick, too practical. Eliza felt it like a finger pointing. Harrow's mouth tightened, but only for a breath. "Mr. Shaw is concerned about stolen church property," he said. "Church property," Rusk repeated. The tin box was under consecrated ground. It was under floorboards. Harrow smiled with patience. A difference of inches can still matter to the law. Candle shifted against Eliza's leg. One weak paw pressed the floor, then scraped once. She touched his head, warning him. The dog stopped, but his nose kept working. He had found a smell in that room and would not let it go. Shaw stepped inside the vestry. His gaze passed over the communion table and halted near the curtain. Eliza held her breath. He was not a hard-looking man. His cheeks were pale, his beard trimmed clean, and his gloves looked softer than any cloth she had ever washed. That made him worse. Men like that did not need to raise a fist. They carried ledgers instead. "Sheriff," Shaw said, "if that box contains bank records, I must insist." "You must insist in daylight," Rusk cut in. "Not in a church after midnight." Harrow's eyes cooled. "Caleb, careful. A troubled girl may have put you in a difficult position." Eliza understood then. Harrow did not need to accuse Rusk. He only had to make the sheriff imagine how guilt would look on him. Rusk stepped aside slowly. "The girl is not here." Candle's tail struck the floor once. Every man heard it. Deacon Waller lifted the lamp. Harrow turned toward the curtain. Eliza gathered Candle against her skirt, knowing the dog could not run. But before Harrow could cross the room, a knock struck the front doors so sharply that all three men turned. Mrs. Ruth Bell stood in the aisle, soaked under a black shawl, gripping the church rail with one hand. "I saw the wagon," she said. "Thought someone had died." "No one has died tonight," Harrow replied. Ruth looked at the dark floorboards. "That is not the same as saying no one ever did." The silence that followed gave Eliza the first clean breath she had taken all night. Harrow walked Ruth toward the doors, speaking softly. Shaw and Waller followed him. But Shaw looked back once at the vestry cabinet. Rusk waited until their footsteps faded, then pulled the curtain open. "Go," he said. "Take the back lane. Do not come to my office. Do not go to the bank. And for God's sake, keep that dog quiet." Why did Shaw ask about parish copies? Rusk rubbed a hand over his face. Because the church kept birth records. The bank kept debt papers. Sometimes one made the other valuable. That was all he would say. Eliza left by the side passage with Candle limping close. Rain had thinned to mist, and the wagon tracks shone black under the moon. At the corner of the churchyard, Candle stopped near a clump of wet grass. His nose found something half sunk in mud. Eliza knelt and pulled free a small torn receipt, softened by rain but still marked with Shaw's bank seal. Most of the writing had bled away. One line remained clear. "Transfer fee. Received child placement account." Below it was a number. $12. Eliza stared until the ink blurred. $12. The same amount town women had once whispered Miriam Wren took before leaving her baby at the church. The old shame rose like sickness. For a moment, Eliza hated the paper. Then she hated herself for wanting to throw it away. Candle nudged her wrist and turned toward the road Ruth Bell had taken. Ruth lived in a low house behind the livery, where dried herbs hung from the rafters and every window was covered before dark. She opened the door before Eliza knocked, as if she had been waiting. Her face changed when she saw Candle. Not with fear, with grief. "He still knows the way," Ruth whispered. "Whose way?" The old woman looked past Eliza to the empty lane. "Come in before someone sees you." Inside, Ruth set no lamp near the window. She lit one blue candle on the table, and Eliza's hand tightened around the birth scrap. The color was the same as the wax behind the vestry baseboard. Ruth saw her looking. "Your mother used to buy those from a peddler out of Abilene." Said white candles made a room feel watched. Eliza placed the brass tag and the torn receipt on the table. Ruth did not touch either one. When she saw the stamped letters, 17 MW, her lips moved in a prayer with no sound. "What is it?" Eliza asked. "A laundry tag," Ruth said. "Miriam sewed them into bundles for the church. 17 was not cloth. It was a child." The room seemed to tilt. Ruth closed her eyes. "No. I have said that wrong. It was a mark, a way to match papers when names had to be kept apart. Kept apart by whom? Ruth's fear returned so plainly that Eliza knew the answer before the woman spoke. Reverend Harrow kept the book, Ruth said. Mr. Shaw kept the accounts. I only delivered babies and signed where I was told. Eliza pushed the receipt toward her. Did my mother take $12? Ruth flinched. She signed for it. That is not what I asked. She signed because Harrow said if she did not, you would be sent west before dawn. Miriam thought a false shame was better than losing you forever. The words should have comforted Eliza. Instead, they opened a wound she had kept bandaged with anger. All her life, the town had let her believe she had been unwanted. Maybe that lie had been easier for everyone than admitting who had wanted her gone. Candle lowered himself beside Ruth's chair with a tired sigh. The old woman reached down and touched his torn ear. He was there that night, she said. Would not leave the church steps after Miriam's wagon went out. What wagon? Ruth's hand froze. Outside, a horse snorted in the lane. Someone had stopped in front of the house. A man's shadow crossed the curtain, tall and narrow under a preacher's hat. Ruth swept the brass tag into her apron. Back room, she whispered. And if he asks, you were never here. The back room of Ruth Bell's house smelled of dried sage, old wool, and rain leaking through tired shingles. Eliza stood behind a shelf of folded blankets with Candle pressed against her skirt, listening as Reverend Harrow knocked a second time. Ruth took longer than she needed to cross the front room. That was her small rebellion. When she opened the door, her voice carried the thin politeness of a woman who had delivered half the town and buried too many of them. Reverend, she said, at this hour, I saw your candle burning. Harrow sounded almost apologetic. A restless night has found more than one soul. I am old. Sleep does not ask my permission anymore. A pause followed. Eliza could imagine Harrow smiling at that. He always made silence feel like a room he owned. May I come in? You may stand where you are and say what the Lord sent you to say. Candle's nose lifted. His breath trembled once, then steadied. Eliza knelt and laid a hand lightly on his neck, afraid even his breathing would betray them. Harrow did not force the door. That would have made him ordinary. Instead, he lowered his voice. Mrs. Bell, a confused girl may come to you tonight. She may carry stolen papers and dangerous questions. If she does, I hope you remember that mercy sometimes means refusing to feed a fever. Is that what she has? A fever? She has grief, poverty, a mother's weakness in the blood. Those things can make a child mistake accusation for truth. Ruth answered slowly. Miriam had many troubles. Weakness was not one I recall. Another pause. This one was sharper. You were always fond of her, Harrow said. Fondness can color memory. So can guilt. Eliza shut her eyes. The words were brave, but Ruth's hands were not. Through a crack beside the shelf, Eliza saw them shaking against her apron. Harrow noticed too. Your son has done well in San Angelo, has he not? A freight office, I heard. A wife. 2 children now. Ruth said nothing. It would be a sorrow, Harrow continued, for old signatures to be misunderstood by county men who never knew how hard this town was in those years. That was the threat. Soft enough to pass for concern. Clear enough to freeze the room. At last, Ruth said, Good night, Reverend. The door closed. No footsteps moved away at first. Harrow remained outside long enough to make sure fear had time to settle. Then his boots retreated down the wet lane. Ruth barred the door with both hands and leaned against it. For a moment she looked older than any person Eliza had ever seen. He does not need locks, the old woman whispered. He taught this town to lock itself for him. Eliza stepped out with the brass tag and torn receipt still in her palm. What did your son sign? Ruth did not answer right away. She crossed to the table, lifted the blue candle, and led Eliza to a narrow pantry beside the back room. Behind sacks of flour sat a cedar sewing box with Miriam Wren's initials burned faintly into the lid. M.W. The sight of those 2 letters made Eliza's anger falter. They were not evidence first. They were a woman's hands. A life. A mother who had owned small things and lost large ones. I kept it because I was a coward, Ruth said. Inside were needles, a thimble, 2 blue wax stubs, and a roll of cloth tags marked with numbers. Some tags had initials, some did not. Candle pushed his nose toward the bottom of the box and whined. Eliza lifted the tray. Beneath it lay a folded sheet wrapped in brown paper. It was not a full ledger page, only a copied list written in Miriam's careful hand. The first column held numbers, the second held initials. The third held amounts. 17 MW, 12,000, 21 se, 9,5, 2022, 22, 2110, the 3010, 8,000, be, 11,25. The list went on, 12 lines in all, but no full names. Eliza looked at Ruth. Children? Children, papers, and payments, Ruth said. Not always the same order. That was how Harrow kept people confused. A child had a birth name, a church number, sometimes a new family name, sometimes a debt attached before they were old enough to hold a spoon. And the bank? Mr. Shaw handled accounts for the parish fund. I do not know how much he understood at first. At first, Ruth sat down heavily. There are kinds of not knowing a man can choose because they pay well. The torn receipt in Eliza's hand seemed to grow heavier. For years, $12 had meant Miriam sold shame for money. Now, it meant something worse. It meant a price had been written beside a life, then used to stain the only person who tried to stop it. Why did Harrow want me gone today? Eliza asked. Ruth looked toward the door. Because the poor box was never the wound. It was the bandage he tore off, so everyone would look at blood instead of the knife. Eliza frowned. The missing money gave him a reason to search your room, turn the town against you, and remove Candle from the church. If you were gone before sunset, no one would ask why that dog kept going back to the third pew. Candle gave a tired sigh, as if hearing his own name pulled him from far away. Eliza touched the dog's head. His ears were warm. Too warm. The night had cost him more than she wanted to admit. For one moment, she nearly decided to stop. She could leave Mercy Crossing with the torn record, the brass tag, and nothing else. A life somewhere else might still be possible if she ran before morning. Then, Ruth opened the brown paper farther and revealed one more folded document tucked behind the copied list. This paper was older, thicker, and marked with a county seal pressed crooked into the corner. Across the top, in fading ink, were the words Willowbend claim 160 acres. Eliza did not understand land papers, but she understood her own name when she saw the place where it had been altered. The first line read, Heir of Miriam Wren, female child, parish ward. A second hand had crossed out the middle words and written abandoned minor, no lawful claim. Below that stood Gideon Shaw's signature as witness. The room narrowed around Eliza. Ruth reached for her wrist. Listen to me. This does not prove Shaw made the lie. It proves he stood close enough to see it. Close enough is enough. No, not yet. Anger will send you to the bank, and the bank will send you to jail. Eliza stared at the crooked seal. Then where do I go? Ruth's answer came with dread. Jonah Vale, the land office clerk, former clerk. He wrote parish copies when the county office burned in '72. If anyone knows who changed that line, he does. But he drinks now, and he fears Harrow more than judgment. A sound came from beneath the table. Candle had risen again. His legs shook badly, but his nose was fixed on the sewing box. Eliza looked down and saw what he had found under the loose lining. A small strip of blackened paper stuck to the cedar with blue wax. Ruth pulled it free with trembling fingers. Only 4 words survived the burn. Bell tower, second rope. Before Eliza could ask what it meant, 3 hard knocks struck the front door. Not Harrow's polite knock this time. A deputy's knock. A man called from the lane. Mrs. Bell, open up. Sheriff's orders. We're looking for Eliza Wren. Ruth moved faster than Eliza thought an old woman could move. She took the Willowbend paper, the copied list, and the torn receipt from the table, wrapped them inside a flour sack, and shoved the bundle into Eliza's hands. Back pantry, she whispered. There is a hatch under the potato bin. It opens behind the livery wall. Candle tried to rise and failed the first time. Eliza bent to help him, feeling the heat in his ribs and the hard shiver running through his legs. The knock came again, louder. Ruth crossed to the front room with the blue candle still burning on the table. "I am coming," she called. Her voice had gone thin, but not broken. Eliza dragged the potato bin aside and found the hatch. Damp air breathed up from a narrow crawl space. Candle hesitated at the edge. He was too old for holes and dark passages, but when the deputy's boots entered the front room, the dog lowered his head and slipped down first. Eliza followed with the flour sack clutched to her chest. Above them, Ruth was saying she had seen no one but the preacher and the rain. The passage was no more than packed earth under planks. Eliza crawled until her palms filled with splinters and mud. Candle moved ahead by scent, slow and stubborn, stopping once when his back legs gave out. She pushed her shoulder under his belly and helped him forward. By the time they came out behind the livery, his breath sounded wet. "You should have stayed," she whispered. Candle leaned against her boot as if the idea offended him. Jonah Vale lived above the abandoned print shop 2 streets from the bank. Once, he had been clerk to the county land office, a careful man with a clean collar and ink always on his thumb. Now his windows were patched with feed sacks, and the stairwell smelled of whiskey, dust, and old paper. Ruth had said he feared Harrow more than judgment. Eliza believed it when he opened the door holding a pistol that shook in his hand. "I have no records," Jonah said, before she spoke. Candle lifted his nose toward the room and gave one tired huff. Jonah looked down at the dog. Whatever denial he had prepared left his face. "Miriam's dog," he said. Eliza stepped closer. "Then you know why I'm here." "No. I know why you should not be." She pushed the flour sack into his chest. "Ruth Bell said you wrote parish copies when the county office burned." Jonah did not open the bundle at first. His room was crowded with old ledgers, empty bottles, and newspapers stacked by year. On the wall hung a faded map of Mercy County with burned edges. When he finally unfolded the Willow Bend paper, his mouth tightened at the altered line. "I did not write that change. But you know who did. I know whose hand it resembles." He looked toward the window, where the bank clock stood visible across the street. "Resemblance is not proof." Eliza laughed once, without humor. "Everyone in this town says that when proof points at a rich man." Jonah flinched. Gideon Shaw signed many things he did not read closely enough. That is a convenient kind of innocence. It is, and a profitable one. Jonah touched the witness signature with one stained finger. But Shaw was not the keeper of names. Harrow was. The bank could take land only after the church made a child into nobody. The words settled over Eliza with a weight she could not throw off. A child into nobody. That was what her life had felt like, though she had never known it had been done on paper first. She took out the brass tag. 17. M. W. Jonah closed his eyes. Miriam Wren's bundle. Female child. Parish ward pending claim. That was how it began. What began? The separation. Name on one paper. Number on another. Debt on a third. Land claim somewhere else. If anyone asked, no single record proved the whole sin. Candle limped to a pile of old coats near the stove and began nosing through them. Eliza almost called him back, but Jonah watched the dog with a strange, frightened patience. "Miriam came to me 3 days before she died," he said. "She had Candle with her." He was younger then, still had one good eye. She carried blue wax on her sleeve and a copy of the parish birth page under her bodice. She said Harrow was moving children west under placement papers. Some had land attached to their names. Some had dead parents who never knew they had left anything behind. Eliza's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "And me?" Jonah's face folded with shame. "You had Willow Bend. 160 acres along the creek bend. Not much to a cattle baron, but enough water to matter. Enough that the wrong men wanted your name cut loose from it. Dues the men. From 160 acres. My mother signed me over." She signed a delay. Eliza went still. Jonah reached into a drawer and took out a cracked spectacles case. Inside was a strip of paper, folded so many times it had softened at the corners. Harrow gave her a choice: sign an abandonment statement, or you would be placed on a freight wagon before dawn with 3 other children. She signed because the statement kept you in Mercy Crossing as a parish ward until the committee met. She thought that gave her 1 week to reach the county attorney. Eliza heard Ruth's words again. A false shame was better than losing you forever. Until that moment, some part of her had still resisted believing it. Anger had been easier. Anger gave shape to abandonment. Love, twisted through fear, was harder to hold. She did not leave me, Eliza said. No, she was going for help. Yes. The room blurred. Eliza turned away because she would not cry in front of Jonah Vale. Candle had found something in the old coats. He pulled at a sleeve with his teeth, weakly but with purpose. Jonah crossed the room and lifted the coat. It was black wool, not his size, with a faint smell of lamp oil and rain. Harrow left that here last winter, Jonah said. Said Charity should not be proud. Candle growled at the sleeve. Eliza bent closer. The smell was familiar now. Lamp smoke, blue wax, and the same bitter oil from the vestry scrap. Candle had not only remembered the church floor, he remembered Harrow's scent from the night Miriam disappeared. Jonah saw understanding reach her. Do not build a hanging rope out of a dog's nose, he said quietly. I am building nothing. He is finding what you men buried. The words struck Jonah harder than she intended. He sat down, suddenly older. There is one thing I did not burn. Eliza turned back. He took the charred strip from Ruth's sewing box and read the 4 surviving words. Bell Tower. Second rope. His hand shook. That is not a message for the bell rope. The old tower has 2 pull lines. One rings the bell. The second drops the storm shutter over the west window. During the county office fire, we hid copied records in that shutter box until new shelves were built. Miriam knew because she scrubbed soot from the tower stairs. Are the records still there? I do not know. Did Harrow know? Jonah did not answer fast enough. A bell sounded across town. Not the church bell. The bank clock, striking 2. Under it came another sound. Hoofbeats, stopping in the street below. Jonah blew out his lamp. Someone followed you. Candle stepped between Eliza and the door, trembling so badly his nails clicked against the floorboards. From below, Gideon Shaw's voice rose through the stairwell. Mr. Vale, the banker called, polite as Sunday. I only need a moment about some old signatures. Jonah Vale moved before Eliza could. He caught her by the sleeve, pushed her and Candle toward a narrow storage closet, behind the old press frames, and set one finger against his lips. Candle resisted only long enough to face the stairwell. His legs shook beneath him, but his head stayed lifted toward Shaw's voice, as if the banker's politeness carried a smell of ink and locked drawers. Jonah opened the door with the pistol hidden behind his thigh. Mr. Shaw, he said. A poor hour for banking. Gideon Shaw stood on the landing with his hat in hand. Rain jeweled the brim. He looked embarrassed to be there, which made the visit more dangerous. I apologize, Jonah. Reverend Harrow believes certain parish papers may have been misunderstood tonight. Papers are often misunderstood by men who sign too many of them. Shaw's smile thinned. And by men who copy them while drunk. Inside the closet, Eliza felt Jonah's shame cross the room like a draft. Candle pressed against her knee. She could hear the dog working for air now, each breath rougher than the last crawl space had left him. I have nothing for you, Jonah said. Then you will not mind if I look. I do mind. Shaw lowered his voice. Old mistakes can be forgiven when they remain old. But if a girl carrying stolen church property comes here, and if you help her, Reverend Harrow will not be the only man asked to remember 1,872. Jonah said nothing. That county fire made many heroes, Shaw continued, and a few useful liars. Eliza tightened her grip on the flour sack. Useful liars. Jonah had not told all of it. Through a crack in the closet wall, she saw him turn slightly, not toward Shaw, but toward the map with burned edges. I copied what I was handed, Jonah said, and sometimes improved it. The words hung there. Shaw did not search the room. He did not have to. He placed a folded notice on Jonah's desk. By morning, Sheriff Rusk will have authority to recover any parish property taken from church grounds, including animals used in trespass. His eyes shifted once toward the closet. A blind dog may stir sympathy, but sympathy is poor defense against a public health order. Candle gave the faintest growl. Shaw heard it. His expression did not change. "Good night, Jonah." He left without hurrying. For several seconds, Jonah remained at the door. Then he shut it, leaned his forehead against the wood, and whispered, "God, forgive me." Eliza stepped out. "What did you improve?" Jonah turned. In the lampless room, he looked carved from guilt. One line. That is what I told myself. One line on a parish ward copy after the county fire. Harrow said the original had been damaged. He had Shaw's witness mark already. He told me the child's mother was dead and the girl had no lawful kin. I wrote, "Abandoned minor." No lawful claim, because I was 26. Hungry for my clerkship, and afraid of the preacher who fed half the town. "My line," Eliza said. His silence answered. She wanted to hate him cleanly. It would have been easier than seeing the ruin in his face. But Candle crossed the room and touched Jonah's boot with his nose. The old dog did not forgive him. He only recognized him as part of the trail. Jonah wiped his mouth with one shaking hand. The shutterbox may prove more than Willowbend. If Miriam hid copies there, they will show the same pattern. Numbers separated from names. Children separated from claims. Claims separated from debt papers. How many? I do not know. How many, Jonah? He looked toward the bank clock through the patched window. Enough that Harrow would burn a church before letting them be read aloud. They waited until Shaw's horse moved away, then took the back stairs down to the alley. Eliza wanted to carry Candle, but he fought her weakly, insisting on his feet. Pride, memory, or pain kept him moving. Every few steps, his hindquarters dipped. Jonah found an old canvas sling from the print shop and helped loop it under the dog's belly. Together, they half-carried him through the sleeping town. Mercy Crossing Church rose at the end of the street, dark except for one lamp burning in Harrow's study window. On the front doors, a fresh notice had been nailed crookedly under the rain. Jonah held the match close while Eliza read. Notice of recovery. Parish documents, poor box funds, and one diseased stray animal are to be surrendered to Sheriff Caleb Rusk by morning bell. Eliza Wren is requested for questioning regarding theft, trespass, and malicious disturbance of worship. Below the notice was Reverend Harrow's signature, smooth as a hymn. Candle stood beneath it, swaying. Eliza tore the paper down. Jonah grabbed her wrist. That notice is bait. So was the poor box. The church side door was barred now. But Jonah had known the building before Harrow replaced the old locks. They entered through a coal hatch near the kitchen steps and climbed the narrow tower stairs in darkness. Candle could not manage them. Eliza carried him at last, one step at a time, his ribs hot against her arms. He was heavier than he had any right to be and lighter than he should have been. Halfway up, he whimpered once. She stopped, held him against the wall, and almost turned back. The bell rope hung down the center of the tower. Beside it, gray with dust, was the second line. Jonah pulled it gently. Above them, wood groaned. A storm shutter shifted open over the west window, dropping a rain of grit into Eliza's hair. Candle lifted his head, suddenly alert, and sniffed toward the shutter frame. Behind a loose panel sat a narrow tin cartridge box, blackened by old smoke. Miriam had known. Eliza set Candle down and opened the box with Jonah's knife. Inside were folded parish copies, brittle but dry, tied with blue thread. Not 12, more. Some carried initials she had seen in Miriam's list. Others had names she had heard all her life without understanding why those families had gone silent. Elias Crow, Jenny Tolliver, Lydia Bell, Samuel Pike, Clara Dunn. Beside, several names were land references, water rights, or guardianship transfers. One sheet listed Willowbend claim with Eliza's birth date intact. Another tied Shaw's bank to a parish debt account, A third bore Harrow's handwriting beside the phrase, "Placement approved." Jonah read the names with the careful dread of a man counting graves he had helped cover. Lydia Bell had grown up in Ruth's kitchen after her mother was told a fever took her baby at the mission house. Samuel Pike now worked cattle for the same ranch that held his dead father's water rights. Elias Crow had left town at 14 with no memory of the creek claim his mother once filed. Each page answered one question and raised a worse one. The children had not only been moved, renamed, or shamed. Their futures had been divided into debts, accounts, and acres before they were old enough to speak for themselves. The threat had grown beyond her life. Eliza looked at Jonah. "These people are still here. Some are, some left. Some were told their children died." Candle nosed the bottom of the box and whined. Eliza lifted the stack. Beneath it lay a ledger cover without its pages, the leather scorched along one edge. Inside the front cover, written in Miriam's hand, was a note. "If the page is gone, ask why SH kept the bell key." Jonah cursed softly. The main ledger page is missing. A door opened below. Lantern light climbed the tower stairs. Sheriff Rusk's voice rose through the dark. "Eliza, come down slow. Harrow says if the dog is with you, I am to take him first." Sheriff Rusk's lantern rose one step at a time, throwing his shadow ahead of him until it reached Eliza before he did. Jonah stood near the shutter box with both hands lifted. Candle swayed beside the tin cartridge box, too tired even to growl. Eliza held the parish copies against her chest and waited for the sheriff to decide what kind of man he still had time to become. Rusk reached the top stair and saw the open shutter, the blue thread, the names, and the scorched ledger cover. His face changed, but not enough to save anyone yet. "Harrow says I am to take the dog first," he said. Eliza looked down at Candle. The old dog's head hung low, but his body leaned toward her, faithful past sense. "Then you will have to take him from me. I have a lawful order." "No. You have a preacher's fear dressed up as one." Rusk's jaw worked. Below them, a deputy called his name from the nave. Harrow's voice followed, soft and carrying. "Sheriff, do not let that poor girl harm herself further." Jonah shut his eyes at the sound. Eliza did not. Something had shifted in her during the climb up the tower. She had spent 19 years being spoken for. By Harrow, by town women, by papers with her name cut out, by a dead mother's shame written by other hands. The records in her arms were not enough to make her brave, but they were enough to make cowardice feel worse than danger. She held one sheet toward Rusk. "Read it. I know what it is. Then read it like you did not know, and tell me if I am still the crime in this room." The sheriff took the paper. His eyes moved over the intact Willowbend line, Miriam's name, Eliza's birth date, and Harrow's placement approval. His mouth tightened at Shaw's bank notation. "Downstairs," Harrow called again, still patient, still certain patience would win. Rusk folded the sheet and handed it back. "If I let you leave with church records, they will charge you. If you take them, they vanish." He looked toward Candle. The dog had turned his nose toward the sheriff's coat pocket, sniffing through pain. Rusk noticed and pulled back, as if the blind animal had accused him. Then he reached slowly into the pocket and took out the brass tag from the tin box. He had kept it, not surrendered it. Not courage, maybe, but not obedience either. "You will not get through the front," Rusk said. "Harrow has Waller and 2 committeemen below. Shaw is at the bank sending for Judge Weller. By sunrise, they will call this theft, trespass, and madness. Then I need someone who prints faster than they lie." For the first time, Rusk almost smiled. "Lottie Crane." Jonah stared at him. "The newspaper woman? She has a press and no love for Harrow." Rusk moved to the bell rope and tied it around the inside latch of the tower door. "This will hold them a minute, not longer. You are helping me?" "I am being late," he said. "There is a difference." They went down through the choir loft and out a side window above the kitchen roof. Jonah climbed first, then Eliza passed the flour sack of papers down to him. Candle could not jump. Rusk took off his coat, wrapped the old dog in it, and lowered him by the sleeves, while Eliza held her breath so hard her ribs hurt. Candle landed against Jonah with a weak grunt, but when Eliza reached the ground, He pushed his nose into her hand. Behind them, the tower door shook. Harrow's voice lost its softness for one brief word. Caleb. That single word was enough to make Rusk flinch, but he did not turn back. He led them through the alley, behind the undertaker's shed, and left them near the rear door of the Mercy Crossing Gazette. Lottie Crane opened with a pistol in one hand and printer's ink on the other. She was younger than Eliza expected, with sleeves rolled to her elbows and a stare that made excuses feel poorly built. "Sheriff," she said, "either you are arresting me at a strange hour, or the town has finally become interesting." Rusk stepped aside. "Read what the girl brought," Lottie read, standing by the press. One page, then another. Her face did not soften. It sharpened. She asked no foolish questions, only dates, names, and who had seen each paper before her. Jonah confessed his copied line in a voice that nearly failed. Ruth Bell arrived before dawn, soaked and shaking, carrying the brass tag hidden in her glove and the blue candle from her table wrapped in cloth. When she saw Eliza alive, she sat hard on a crate and began to cry without sound. Lottie set type while they spoke. Not the whole story, not yet. Just enough to make silence impossible. A notice for the Morning Square. Parish records found. County attorney requested. Public reading demanded before church committee action. She made 3 copies by hand after the first pull. One went into her locked drawer. One she gave to Rusk. The third she sealed for Abel Finch, the county attorney who had spent the week at a Ridge Creek, hearing only 14 miles east. Lottie wrote one line across the outside. Parish birth records tied to land fraud. Witnesses present. Public destruction likely. Her apprentice boy took it before sunrise on the fastest horse the livery would trust. Finch would not ride for pity. Lottie knew that. But he had once reopened a guardianship case, because a seal had been pressed crooked. And the Willow Bend seal was crooked enough to trouble a blind judge. "Harrow will say these are stolen," Jonah warned. "They may be," Lottie said. "That does not make them false." Eliza stood near the back wall, with Candle lying at her feet. His breathing had grown shallow. Each rise of his ribs looked negotiated. She knelt and touched the warm space behind his ear. "No more tonight," she whispered. Candle opened his mouth slightly and panted, but his nose twitched toward the press table. At first, Eliza thought he smelled ink. Then he forced himself up, stumbled once, and pushed past Ruth's skirts toward Lottie's wastebasket. Torn paper, spoiled proofs, and string littered the bottom. Candle nosed through it and caught one blackened strip between his teeth. Lottie frowned. That came from the church notice. Ink was still wet when a committee man brought it for posting. Eliza took the strip. It was not from the notice. It was thicker, older, and scorched along one side like the ledger cover in the tower. Only a few handwritten words survived. Bell Key kept in pulpit Bible S.H. page. Jonah gripped the press table. "The missing ledger page," Ruth whispered. "Miriam must have torn that from something before the rest burned." Candle sank to the floor, spent by the small victory. Eliza gathered him close, feeling how little strength remained in him. The dog had not found the final proof. Not yet. He had found where Harrow kept it. Outside, the morning bell began to ring. Not by accident. Too early for service. Too hard for prayer. Rusk looked through the ink-streaked window toward the church. People were already moving in the street, drawn by the sound and the scandal nailed to every door. Lottie reached for her coat. "If Harrow wants a public room," she said, "give him one." Eliza tucked the scorched strip inside her bodice, lifted Candle as much as her arms could manage, and looked toward the church where she had spent her life being small. By sunrise, she would walk back through its doors, not as a thief asking mercy, but as the only person left willing to make the town hear the names it had buried. By the time Eliza reached Mercy Crossing Church, the town had gathered the way dry grass gathers flame. Men stood in work coats with breakfast still forgotten on their tables. Women held shawls tight under their chins. Children were pulled close and told not to stare, though every adult in the yard was staring already. On the church doors, Harrow's notice hung beside Lottie Crane's printed demand for a public reading. One called Eliza a thief, The other asked why birth records had been hidden under a church floor. Reverend Harrow stood at the pulpit when she entered, as if he had been expecting a congregation and not a reckoning. Judge Weller sat in the first pew with his cane across his knees. Gideon Shaw stood near the aisle, pale but composed. Sheriff Rusk remained by the door, hat in hand, no longer looking like a man certain of his own badge. Eliza carried candle wrapped in Rusk's coat. The old dog's head rested against her shoulder, his breathing shallow but steady. Ruth Bell walked behind her. Jonah Vale carried the tin cartridge box. Lottie Crane came last, holding printed copies under one arm and looking at every face as though memorizing who would lie. Harrow lifted both hands. "Friends, I had hoped to spare this girl further shame." "Then let the records be read," Eliza said. Judge Weller struck his cane once. "This is a house of worship, not a county court." "It became something else when children's names were cut out under its floor," Lottie replied. Harrow's gaze moved to her with mild sorrow. "Miss Crane, ink is not evidence. Neither is a sermon," she said. A stir moved through the room. Harrow waited it out. He was good at waiting. "The papers carried here were removed from church property without permission. Until lawful review, they are stolen materials. Sheriff, take possession of them." That was the first wall. Law, neat and ready. Rusk looked at Eliza, then at the box in Jonah's hands. His fingers flexed near his belt, but he did not move. "I will hold them after they are read aloud," he said. "Not before." Harrow's face did not change, yet the room felt the crack in his authority. Judge Weller leaned forward. "Sheriff, are you refusing instruction?" "I am refusing to bury paper twice." Eliza set candle gently near the front pew. He tried to stand and could not. She knelt only long enough to touch his ear, then rose with the willow bend sheet in her hand. Her voice shook at first, but the words held. She read Miriam Wren's name, Eliza's birth date, the intact claim line, and the altered phrase that had made her an abandoned minor with no lawful claim. When she read Harrow's placement approval, the first whispers began. When she read Shaw's witness mark, the banker lifted his chin. "I witnessed a parish transfer," Shaw said. "Nothing more." "You witnessed a child being turned into nobody," Eliza answered. Shaw drew a folded paper from his coat. "There is more. I had hoped not to display it." He handed it to Judge Weller, who adjusted his spectacles. "A receipt signed by Miriam Wren," the judge said. $12 received for voluntary surrender of infant Ward. That was the second wall. Shame. Polished and old. The room turned toward Eliza. She felt the lie reach for her again, the same lie that had lived in her bones for years. Ruth Bell made a small sound but did not speak. Harrow saw the old woman weakening and stepped toward her with practiced mercy. "Mrs. Bell, you delivered the child. You saw the mother's condition. Speak only what conscience permits." Ruth's mouth opened. Fear closed it. Harrow lowered his voice. "Remember your son." There it was, not loud enough for the back pews, but loud enough for Ruth and Eliza and God, if he was listening. Ruth looked toward the door as though she might still escape the past. Then candle stirred. The blind dog dragged himself forward one trembling step and pressed his nose against Ruth's shoe. It was not enough to save anyone by force. It was only a reminder. Ruth had seen him on the church steps the night Miriam's wagon left. She had known whose dog waited until morning. Ruth straightened. Miriam signed because Reverend Harrow told her the child would be sent west before dawn if she refused. The $12 was not a sale. It was a mark in a false account. Harrow's tone sharpened. "A frightened old woman can confuse memory." "I can," Ruth said. "So I brought my delivery book." She opened the worn black book from under her shawl. Page after page held births in her narrow hand. At the 3rd of October 1868, the entry was clear. "Female child, Miriam Wren, living issue, no surrender witnessed." Lottie took the book and held it where the nearest pews could see. Judge Weller shifted. Shaw looked at the floor. Still, the judge tried to gather the room back into order. He said Ruth's book was private property. Jonah's confession was the word of a disgraced clerk, and Lottie's printed notice had no standing before the county. For a moment, Harrow's supporters found their breath again. Deacon Waller murmured that the church had been humiliated enough. A woman in the rear asked whether old records should shame living families. The truth had entered the room, but it had not yet survived it. Harrow moved to the pulpit Bible and laid one hand upon it. This has gone far enough. Grief has made theater of a sacred mourning. That animal is fevered, the girl is desperate, and stolen records are being waved before decent people without county review. At the word animal, Deacon Waller stepped from the side aisle with a rope. Reverend says the dogs to be removed. That was the third wall. Cruelty dressed as order. Eliza moved first, but Candle moved before her. With a sound that was almost pain, Candle dragged himself up. His legs shook so badly the pew nearest him rattled when he brushed it. He did not go toward Waller. He turned toward the pulpit. His nose lifted to the big Bible under Harrow's hand. Harrow's fingers tightened on the cover. Eliza saw it. "Open the Bible," she said. Harrow smiled faintly. "Blasphemy now? Open it." Judge Weller lifted his cane. "Reverend, if there is nothing improper, there are limits," Harrow said. Lottie stepped closer. "The limit was passed when you hid records in a church tower." Harrow seized the Bible as if to lift it away. Candle lunged. It was not a young dog's leap, not strong, not clean. It was a desperate push from a body that had little left. His teeth caught the loose leather marker hanging from the Bible's spine. The book tipped, struck the pulpit edge, and fell open across the floor. From between the back pages slid a folded ledger sheet, browned at the edges, sealed in oilcloth. The whole church seemed to breathe in at once. Harrow reached down, but Russ caught his wrist. Not hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to choose. Eliza picked up the sheet. At the top was Harrow's own hand, parish placement and claim conversion. Beneath it were numbers, initials, birth names, guardian changes, bank accounts, land references, and payments. 12 children, some living, some gone. Some still sitting in that very room beside parents who had been told paperwork was lost, or deaths were mistaken, or debts were acts of providence. Beside Willowbend claim stood Eliza Wren, birth name intact, with the phrase "transfer to parish trust pending Shaw foreclosure" crossed once and rewritten in darker ink. At the bottom, Miriam had written a line so small Eliza almost missed it. Silas kept the names. Gideon kept the money. Caleb was told too late and stayed afraid. Rusk closed his eyes. Harrow's mask did not fall all at once. It tightened, hardened, and became something colder. "Those notes are the ravings of a woman who stole church copies. My mother died trying to get them out," Eliza said. "She died in a wagon accident." Ruth shook her head. Her wagon left after midnight, with no team assigned from the livery book. Jonah added, "The parish copies were changed the next morning." Lottie raised one printed notice. "And copies of these records are already on their way to County Attorney Abel Finch." For the first time, Harrow looked toward the doors. They opened before he could speak. Abel Finch entered with Lottie's apprentice behind him, both dusted from hard riding and Ridge Creek road mud. Finch was not dramatic. He did not thunder. He only removed his gloves, asked who had touched the papers, and took the ledger sheet as if it were a loaded weapon. He compared it with the copied parish records, Ruth's delivery book, and Jonah's sworn statement, written in ink still drying on Lottie's desk. When he reached the crooked Willowbend seal, his face grew grave by degrees. "I am impounding these records under county authority," Finch said. "Reverend Harrow, Mr. Shaw, you will come with me. Sheriff Rusk, your conduct will be reviewed." Harrow looked over the congregation, searching for the old room he had owned. He found faces changed by names. Lydia Bell stood with one hand over her mouth. Samuel Pike's father had gone white. A woman near the aisle sobbed into her gloves after hearing a child she had mourned, listed as transferred, not dead. Harrow lifted his chin. "You would take the word of a thief, a drunk, and a blind dog?" Eliza looked at Candle, collapsed beside the pulpit Bible, his torn ear flat against the floor. "No," she said. "They took the word of the records you forgot to burn." The public justice did not feel like victory. It felt like a door forced open in a house full of smoke. Finch read enough aloud for the town to understand who had done it. how the names were separated, why land and debt had been tied to children, and who had been harmed. Shaw sat down before anyone told him to. Harrow remained standing until Rusk took his arm. The sheriff's hand shook, but he did not let go. Only when the church emptied into a stunned mourning did Eliza return to the third pew. Candle lay there now, wrapped in Rusk's coat, breathing softly. Under the loosened board, Ruth had found one final thing, a narrow envelope tucked where the tin box had rested. It was addressed in Miriam's hand. For Eliza, when names are safe again. Eliza sat on the floor beside Candle and opened it with care. The letter was short. Miriam wrote that love could be made to look like leaving when cruel men held the road. She wrote that Candle knew the place under the pew because he had slept there while she hid the box. She wrote that if Eliza ever read those words, then the truth had outlived fear. Eliza pressed the letter to her mouth. Candle's nose touched her wrist. Outside, Mercy Crossing was beginning the hard work of speaking names it had avoided for years. Inside, under the church's wounded floor, Eliza finally understood that justice had not brought her mother back. It had done something quieter. It had given Miriam's love a place to stand. She rested her hand on Candle's side and felt one slow breath, then another. "You brought me home," she whispered. The blind dog did not lift his head. He only leaned into her touch, as if the long road had always been leading there.